Welcome to Mystery Night. Tonight, we bring you a chilling tale of whispers, shadows, and secrets buried deep within the walls of an ancient house. This is the story of Daniel Carter, a young man who returns to his family as ancestral home only to discover that the Carter bloodline is cursed, bound to guard a forbidden cellar where something unspeakable waits. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for a journey into darkness. This is the house where the shadows whisper. The bus rattled down the narrow country road, its headlights cutting through the mist that clung to the trees like a second skin. Daniel Carter sat alone near the back, his duffel bag at his feet, his forehead pressed lightly against the cold glass. The vibration of the engine buzzed through his bones, and the rhythmic thump of the tires against the uneven pavement made his eyelids heavy. But sleep wouldn't come, not tonight. Not after everything that had happened outside. The woods stretched on endlessly, dark and silent, broken only by flashes of crooked fence posts and the occasional half-collapsed barn. The driver hadn't spoken since they left the station an hour ago, and the other passengers, two farmers and a woman with a baby, had all gotten off miles back. Now it was just Daniel, the driver, and the growing unease that seemed to thicken with every passing mile. He checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. The bus was late. His uncle had promised to meet him at midnight at the crossroads near Hollow Creek, but the road ahead still looked endless. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and damp earth. It had been years since he last came here, since he last saw Hollow Creek, the town his mother had sworn she would never return to. But she was gone now, taken by an illness that came too fast and left too little behind, and Daniel had nowhere else to go. His uncle, Richard, had offered him a place to stay, a big house on the edge of town, older than memory itself, passed down through generations of the Carter family. "You'll like it here," Richard had said on the phone, his voice crackling with static. "It's quiet, peaceful, a place to start over." But Daniel didn't trust peace. Not anymore. The bus screeched suddenly, the brakes whining as they lurched to a stop. Daniel's heart jumped. The driver cleared his throat for the first time all night. "This is your stop, kid." His voice was gravelly low. Daniel nodded, hoisted his duffel onto his shoulder, and stepped into the night. The cold hit him immediately, biting at his skin, sharper than the city chill he was used to. The air here felt heavier somehow. The silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the faint creak of the bus doors as they closed behind him. The bus rumbled off, its red taillights swallowed quickly by the fog. Within moments, Daniel was alone at the crossroads, a single flickering street lamp buzzing above him. To the east stretched the dark silhouette of Hollow Creek, its rooftops barely visible through the mist. To the west, the road vanished into the woods, and standing just beyond the lamplight was a man. Uncle Richard. At least, Daniel hoped it was. The man wore a long coat and wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, but as he stepped closer, Daniel caught the sharp features, the stern mouth, the piercing gray eyes he remembered faintly from childhood photographs. "Daniel," Reach said, his voice smooth, controlled. "You've grown." Daniel swallowed hard. It's been a while. Richard's lips curved into something almost like a smile. Come on, the house isn't far. We'll talk once we're inside. Daniel followed him, his boots crunching on the gravel. The lamplight faded behind them as they walked into the fog, toward a place he barely remembered but would soon never forget. The walk to the house was longer than Daniel expected. The gravel road twisted through fields of tall grass, their tips shimmering with dew beneath the moonlight. The fog hung low, curling around his ankles like restless smoke. Richard moved quickly, his long strides unbroken, as though he had walked this path 1,000 times. Daniel, with his duffel dragging at his shoulder, struggled to keep up. After 10 minutes, the fields gave way to trees. The forest loomed on either side of the narrow road, branches arching overhead until they almost touched. Daniel tried not to stare too long into the gaps between trunks, but his eyes kept catching movement shadows that seemed to shift when he was in tea looking directly at them. Finally, through the fog, he saw it. The Carter house. It rose from the earth like a blackened monument, 3 stories tall with gabled windows and a roof so steep it seemed to scrape the night sky. Its walls were dark stone, weathered by decades of storms, and ivy crawled like veins across its surface. A wrought iron gate stood before it, twisted and rusted but still imposing. On one side of the gate hung a broken lantern that swayed gently in the wind. Though Daniel hadn't felt a breeze since they left the crossroads, Richard unlocked the gate with an iron key that looked far older than it should. The hinges groaned as he pushed it open, the sound echoing into the night. Inside the gate, the yard was overgrown. Weeds climbed between cobblestones, and the skeletal remains of flower beds lay choked with nettles. Statues lined the path to the front door, crumbling angels, faceless saints, each one streaked with moss and time. Daniel's throat tightened. Something about the statues made him uneasy, as if their blank eyes followed him in the darkness. Richard stopped at the heavy oak doors of the house. He pressed a hand against the wood for a moment, almost reverently, before pushing them open. The smell hit Daniel first. Old wood, damp stone, and something faintly metallic like rust or dried blood. The air inside was cool, stale, and heavy, as if it had been trapped for centuries. The entrance hall stretched high, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. A grand staircase curled upward, its banister carved with intricate patterns that seemed almost alive in the flickering light of the chandelier above. The chandelier itself swayed faintly, though there was no draft. Portraits lined the walls. Stern-faced men and women, their eyes painted with unsettling precision. Daniel had the strange impression that they were studying him, weighing him, deciding whether he belonged. Richard closed the doors behind them with a thud that echoed through the vast space. "Welcome home," he said softly. Daniel shifted uneasily. "It doesn't exactly feel welcoming." A flicker of amusement crossed Richard's face. "It grows on you." He led Daniel down the hall, past tall doors that remained firmly shut. Their handles were polished, as if touched often, but the wood around them was scarred with scratches. Daniel forced himself not to look too closely. At the end of the hall, Richard opened a door and gestured inside. "This will be your room, at least for now." And in the cracked mirror across the room, the reflection did the room was small compared to the grandeur of the house, but still larger than Daniel's old apartment. A heavy 4-poster bed dominated the center, its curtains moth-eaten and gray, the wallpaper peeled in places, revealing layers beneath that hinted at older designs, long forgotten. A cracked mirror leaned against one wall, its surface fogged with age. Daniel set his duffel on the bed. "Thanks," Richard lingered in the doorway. "You'll find this place has its own rhythms. You'll hear things at night. The house set up. Don't let it trouble you." Daniel frowned. "What kind of things?" Richard's eyes glinted in the dim light. "Whispers, footsteps, echoes of the past. Nothing more." He left before Daniel could ask anything else, the door closing with a soft click that felt far louder than it should have. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cracked mirror across the room. His reflection wavered faintly, as though the glass were rippling. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and when he looked again, the reflection was still. But for the briefest moment, he could have sworn there was someone standing behind him in the glass. Daniel and Pa. Only the essentials. A change of clothes. His toothbrush. His journal. He left the rest in the duffel bag. Not yet ready to settle into this place. The silence pressed down on him, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Every sound seemed louder here, sharper, as though the house amplified the smallest movement. He changed into a t-shirt and sat on the bed, flipping open his journal. His mother had given it to him a year before she passed, insisting that writing things down would help him untangle the knots in his head. The pages were filled with half-finished thoughts, fragments of nightmares, lists of things he tried to forget. Tonight, though the words wouldn't come. His pen hovered over the page, then dropped uselessly onto the blanket. The cracked mirror caught his eye again. Something about it gnawed at him. He stood, walked across the room, and ran his hand along the frame. The wood was carved with symbols faded, almost invisible, but not random. Circles intersecting with sharp angles, patterns that looked like they belonged in some forgotten ritual. A sudden creak echoed from the hallway. Daniel froze, his pulse quickening. He turned toward the door. The handle moved just slightly, as if someone had brushed against it. He waited, barely breathing. Nothing. Silence. He exhaled slowly and shook his head. The house settles, he reminded himself. Richard's words. Just the house. But when he glanced back at the mirror, his reflection was smiling. Daniel stumbled backward, hitting the bed frame with his knees. His reflection, though, the thing in the glass stood perfectly still, lips curled into a grin Daniel knew he wasn't making. Its eyes glowed faintly, a pale gray light that shimmered like smoke. Then it blinked, and the glass was empty. Daniel's chest heaved. He rubbed his face with his hands, whispering to himself, "I'm just tired. Just tired. I haven't slept in days." He climbed into the bed, pulling the covers tight around him. The mattress sagged, ancient springs groaning under his weight. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to take him. But the house had other plans. At first, it was just faint whispers so soft he thought they were part of a dream. Words too quiet to understand, flowing like a current beneath the silence. He rolled onto his side, pressing his pillow over his ear. Still, the whispers came. Then came the footsteps, slow. pausing just long enough for him to believe they were gone before starting again. His heart pounded. He wanted to call for Richard, but his throat was dry, his voice caught. The footsteps stopped, the handle turned. Daniel bolted upright. Eyes wide in the darkness, the door rattled, as though someone tested it, pushing gently against the wood. His breath came fast, shallow. He grabbed the lamp from the nightstand, ready to use it as a weapon if the door opened. But it didn't. Slowly, the pressure eased, the handle stilled, the footsteps retreated, fading down the hall until they were gone. Daniel sat awake for what felt like hours, lamp still clutched in his hand, until exhaustion finally dragged him into a restless sleep. Not sleep. Daniel awoke with a start, his throat dry, his skin damped with cold sweat. The room was still dark, though a faint line of gray light leaked through the curtains, suggesting dawn was not far off. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was, the strange bed, the heavy curtains, the smell of dust and stone. Then it all came rushing back. The house, the whispers, the footsteps outside his door. He sat up slowly, every muscle stiff. The lamp was still clutched in his hand, its base slick with sweat. He set it down carefully, the clink of metal against wood unnaturally loud in the silence. The cracked mirror loomed across the room. Daniel tried not to look, but his eyes were drawn to it, the way a moth can't resist a flame. His reflection stared back, pale and hollow-eyed. Nothing unusual. Just him. He let out a shaky breath. Then the glass rippled, like a stone had been dropped into water. The surface shivered, distorting his reflection. Daniel froze. He told himself it was a trick of his tired eyes, but deep down he knew it wasn't. The ripples spread, slow and deliberate, until a hand pressed against the inside of the mirror. It was pale, almost translucent, fingers long and thin, nails sharp as glass. The hand slid down the surface, leaving behind streaks of frost. Daniel stumbled to his feet, his chair tipping over. No. Its eyes glowed faintly again, that strange gray smoke swirling in their depths. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out, tonally missed. Then, finally, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs, his breath caught in his throat. He backed toward the door, fumbling for the handle. His fingers shook as he tried to twist it open, but the knob refused to budge, as if frozen in place. The reflection pressed both hands against the glass now, its grin widening. The mirror began to crack, tiny lines spiderwebbing outward from its center. The sound was sharp, brittle, echoing in the small room like gunfire. "Stop!" Daniel whispered, though he knew the word was useless. The glass split further, shards trembling, ready to fall. From behind the cracks, Darkness poured thick and swirling, like smoke that wasn't smoke, alive and moving on its own. Whispers grew louder, overlapping voices Daniel couldn't understand, rising into a frenzy that filled his head until he thought it would split open. Then the mirror stilled. The cracks froze in place. The reflection vanished. Daniel collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the glass. He waited for it to move again, for the whispers to return, but nothing happened. The room was quiet, too quiet. A knock came at the door. Soft, 3 times, Daniel, Richard's voice. Come. Are you awake? Daniel swallowed hard, forcing his voice through the tightness in his throat. Why, I didn't sleep well. The pause on the other side of the door was long enough to make Daniel's stomach twist. Then Richard said, almost kindly, "You'll get used to it." His footsteps retreated down the hall, leaving Daniel alone once more. Daniel turned back to the mirror. The cracks were still there, etched deep into the glass-like scars, and in the center of those cracks, almost invisible, was the faint outline of a smile. The morning light struggled to pierce through the heavy curtains, spilling only thin gray beams across the floorboards. Daniel woke with a pounding headache, his body aching as though he had spent the night fighting instead of sleeping. The cracks in the mirror remained, a jagged web etched deep into the glass. He half expected them to vanish with the sunrise, to reveal themselves as nothing more than a nightmare. But they were still there, sharp, real, undeniable. A hollow chill seeped from the mirror into the room. Daniel avoided looking at it as he dressed, pulling on jeans and a sweater. His reflection, fractured and distorted by the cracks, made his stomach twist. He turned away, focusing on the sound of footsteps approaching outside his door. A knock. Then Richard's voice. "Breakfast is ready. Join me in the dining room." Daniel hesitated. His throat was dry, his mind still echoing with the whisper he had heard in the night. You shouldn't he have come back? But he opened the door. The hallway looked different in daylighter. What passed for daylight here? Shadows still clung stubbornly to the corners, but the golden sconces flickered with dim flame, pushing the darkness back just enough to reveal the house's details. The wallpaper, once rich burgundy, had faded to a dull brown. The portraits that lined the hall seemed less threatening now, though their eyes still followed him with unnerving precision. The dining room was cavernous. A long oak table stretched nearly the entire length of the chamber, its surface scarred with years of use. Dust coated much of it, except for 2 places at the far end where Richard had set plates and cutlery. Richard sat at the head of the table, a steaming cup of tea before him. He gestured for Daniel to sit across. Daniel slid into the chair, glancing at the spread. Eggs, bread, some kind of salted meat. It all looked old-fashioned, the kind of breakfast his grandmother might have served. "Did you sleep?" Rich asked, his eyes sharp, searching. Daniel hesitated. "Not really. The house is noisy." Richard's lips curved faintly. "It speaks. Yes, old houses always do. The trick is learning when to listen and when to ignore it." Daniel frowned. "Ignore what?" "The footsteps, the whispers." Richard's gaze lingered, unblinking. For a moment, Daniel thought he had gone too far, that his uncle would laugh or accuse him of imagining things. Instead, Richard sipped his tea and said, "So you heard them already?" Quicker than I expected. Daniel's stomach tightened. "You mean they're real?" "Real enough," Richard said. "But don't trouble yourself. They cannot harm you unless you invite them." The words chilled Daniel more than the night before. He forced himself to eat, though every bite turned to ash in his mouth. When the meal was finished, Richard stood. "I'll show you the house. You should know where not to wander." They walked through endless corridors, each lined with doors Daniel suspected had not been opened in decades. The house felt alive, breathing around him, its air thick with secrets. Richard pointed out the library, the study, the conservatory with its shattered glass ceiling where vines crawled inside unchecked. But there were rooms he didn't mention, doors with locks heavier than seemed necessary. Doors scratched and scarred, doors that gave off faint drafts of cold air as they passed. Daniel opened his mouth once to ask, but Richard's glance silenced him. At last, they stopped before a massive door at the end of a narrow hall. Richard rested his hand on the knob but did not turn it. "This," he said softly, "is the cellar. You are never to enter. Not under any circumstances." Daniel swallowed hard. "Why?" Richard's expression hardened, the warmth vanishing from his eyes. "Because the house remembers, and some memories are best left buried." The rest of the tour passed in uneasy silence. Richard spoke little, pointing only briefly to rooms, as though naming them was enough to satisfy curiosity. When they returned to the main hall, he left Daniel with a curt nod. "I have business in town," Richard said, pulling on his coat. "Stay inside, explore if you must, but remember what I told you." His hand lingered on the doorframe, eyes narrowing. "This cellar is forbidden." And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing against the stone steps outside until the heavy door shut behind him. Daniel stood alone in the vast hall, the silence swallowing him whole. For a while, he simply wandered. The house stretched endlessly, its corridors winding like a maze, each turn leading to another hall lined with more locked doors, more portraits with accusing eyes. Dust clung to everything, tables, banisters, forgotten furniture covered in white sheets. The air tasted of mold and ash. Eventually, he stumbled upon the library. The double doors groaned as he pushed them open, releasing a draft of stale air. Inside, shelves climbed to the ceiling, stacked with thousands of books, their spines cracked and faded. A spiral staircase wound upward to a second level of shelves, shadowed and unreachable without a lamp. Dust motes swirled in the slivers of light filtering through high, grimy windows. Daniel's heart quickened. Unlike the rest of the house, the library felt alive. Not welcoming, exactly, but charged, as if the air hummed with energy. He ran his fingers along the spines of the nearest books. Many were in languages he didn't recognize: latent Greek, maybe even older scripts that twisted into symbols unfamiliar to him. One book in particular caught his eye. Its cover was black leather, cracked with age, the edges bound with tarnished brass. No title marked the spine, only a faint symbol etched into the cover: A circle intersected by sharp lines, eerily similar to the carvings on the frame of the cracked mirror in his room. He pulled it free. The book was heavier than it looked, its weight unsettling in his hands. He opened to the first page, where a name was scrawled in faded ink. Elias Carter, 1874. Carter. His family. The pages were filled with dense handwriting, notes, and diagrams of strange symbols, rituals, and what looked like journal entries. Daniel skimmed, his eyes catching on words that made his stomach twist. Voices in the walls. Binding. The house. The house as vessel, bloodline tethered. A cold wind brushed the back of his neck. He spun, heart pounding. But the library was empty. The doors were shut. No one had entered. When he looked back at the book, the words had shifted. The neat handwriting blurred, rearranging itself into something new. A phrase stood stark and clear on the page, as though written just for him. The house knows you are here, Daniel. His breath caught in his throat. He dropped the book onto the table, stumbling backward. The sound echoed too loudly, as though the shelves themselves had reacted. A whisper rose around him, low at first, then swelling. Dozens of voices overlapping, chanting in languages he couldn't understand. The sound seemed to come from the very walls, vibrating through the shelves, rattling the windows. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, backing toward the doors. But just as suddenly as it began, the voices stopped. Silence. The book lay opened on the table, its pages still. Only one sentence remained, scrawled in fresh ink that glistened as though it had just been written. Do not go to the cellar. Daniel slammed the book shut, his chest heaving. He didn't need more warnings. His uncle's words, the whispers in the night, the cracks in the mirror, everything pointed to the same truth. There was something in this house that didn't want him here. And worse, there was something in the cellar that did. That night, Daniel lay awake in his room, staring at the cracked ceiling. Sleep would not come. Every time his eyes drifted shut, he saw the words from the book burned into his mind. The house knows you are here, Daniel. The house knows you are here, Daniel. The mirror loomed in the corner, fractured lines cutting through his reflection. He had draped a sheet over it earlier, but even now he swore he could feel it watching him, the air colder in that part of the room. The house was quiet at first, too quiet. Then, slowly, the sounds began. A whisper, soft, female maybe, close right outside his door. Danielo? He sat up sharply, his heart hammering. The voice was so clear it felt impossible that it wasn't real. He held his breath, straining to hear. Again, the whisper. Daniel, help me. This time it came from farther down the hall. Against his better judgment, Daniel slid out of bed. The floorboards groaned under his weight, the sound unbearably loud in the stillness. He opened the door a crack. The hallway stretched out, dimly lit by flickering sconces. Empty. The whisper came again, drifting from the far end where the staircase curved down toward the lower levels. Daniel hesitated. His uncle had told him never to wander at night. But the voice, it was desperate, pleading, human. He couldn't ignore it. He crept down the hall, every step echoing in the silence. The portraits watched him with hollow eyes, their painted faces warped in the weak light. At the top of the stairs, he paused, gripping the banister so tightly his knuckles turned white. The whisper floated up again, clearer now, filled with anguish. Downstairs. Please. Daniel descended. The grand staircase creaked, the sound reverberating through the house like a drumbeat. The lower hall was darker, the sconces unlit, the air colder. Shadows pooled in the corners, shifting as though alive. The voice led him past the dining room, past the locked doors Richard had shown him earlier, until he stood before the cellar door. The wood was dark, reinforced with iron bands. The handle was heavy, cold to the touch. Daniel froze, every warning he'd heard screaming in his mind. Never enter. Do not go to the cellar. The whisper came again, directly from behind the door now. Louder, more insistent. Daniel, open it. He stepped back, shaking his head. No, he whispered to himself. This is a trick. It's just the house. Just the house. Soft, deliberate, from the other side. Daniel's blood ran cold. He stumbled backward, his breath ragged. The air thickened, the shadows lengthened, and for an instant he thought he saw a pale hand slip through the crack beneath the door, reaching for him. He bolted up the stairs, down the hole, slamming his door shut behind him. He pressed his back against it, chest heaving, listening for footsteps following. None came. The whispers had stopped, only the silence remained. When he finally dared to look at the mirror, the sheet he had draped over it was gone, and in the cracked glass, his reflection stood smiling once more. Daniel barely slept. When dawn came, pale and reluctant through the curtains, he was still sitting upright on the edge of his bed, staring at the mirror. The cracks glowed faintly in the morning light, spider webbing across his reflection like a cage. A knock came at the door. Not soft this time, not like the whispering in the night. Firm, solid. Breakfast, Richard's voice said. Daniel forced himself to stand. He didn't want to see his uncle, didn't want to sit across from him pretending everything was normal, but avoiding him felt dangerous. The house was bad enough he couldn't make an enemy of the only living soul in it. At the table, Richard poured tea into 2 chipped porcelain cups. He studied Daniel with calm, unreadable eyes. You look tired. Daniel swallowed hard. I heard someone last night calling my name. Richard didn't react at first. Then he set the teapot down slowly, his fingers lingering on the handle. Voices are common here, he said. They come with the house. Best to Ignore them. Daniel leaned forward, his voice tight. It wasn't just whispers. Someone was at the cellar door. They knocked. Richard's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something cold passing through his eyes. And did you open it? No, Daniel said quickly. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then he nodded once. Good. As long as you keep it closed, you are safe. The words sent a chill through Daniel. Safe from what? He wanted to ask, but the look in Richard's eyes silenced him. After breakfast, Richard left for town again, leaving Daniel alone. The silence of the house pressed heavier than before, thick with unspoken warnings. Daniel tried to distract himself, wandering the halls aimlessly, but everywhere he went, the whispers followed, softer in daylight, but constant, like a current beneath the walls. He ended up back in the library. The black leather book still sat on the table where he had left it. For a long time, he just stared at it, torn between dread and curiosity. Finally, he opened it again. The ink had shifted once more. Whole pages were different now, lines rearranging into new patterns before his eyes. One page drew him in. It was written like a confession, the handwriting frantic, jagged. The house binds us. It feeds on the bloodline. To enter the cellar is to wake what was bound long ago. The Carters are its guardians, but also its prisoners. We cannot leave. We cannot escape. Daniel's chest tightened. He skimmed downward, his eyes locking on the final lines. If you hear them call your name, know this. They know your blood. They will not stop until the door is opened. A sudden gust of wind tore through the library, scattering loose papers. The chandeliers rattled. Daniel slammed a book shut, his pulse racing. As the room settled, he noticed something he hadn't before. On the wall behind the spiral staircase, half hidden by shadows, hung a portrait. The frame was dust-choked, the canvas torn at the edges, but the face was clear. It was his mother, younger, pale. Her eyes shadowed with the same gray smoke he had seen in the mirror. Scrawled across the bottom of the painting, almost scratched into the canvas itself, were words that made Daniel's blood run cold. She opened the door. Daniel could not look away from the portrait. His mother's face stared back at him with hollow eyes. Her expression caught somewhere between sorrow and warning. The smoky gray tint in her irises seemed alive, shifting faintly in the dim light. He reached out, trembling fingers brushing the cracked frame. Dust fell away, but the words scrawled at the bottom remained clear. She opened the door. His breath quickened. His mother had never spoken of Hollow Creek, never spoken of this house, not once. And now here she was, immortalized on the wall, bound forever in paint and shadow. A sound echoed through the library, soft at first, then louder. A heartbeat. Daniel froze, his palms still pressed against the frame. The sound wasn't his own pulse. It came from the portrait itself, deep and steady, like something alive beneath the canvas. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. The heartbeat quickened, thudding faster, louder, until it filled the room. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel ran. He fled the library, his footsteps pounding the halls, not caring where he was going. He only stopped when he reached the grand staircase, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his spine. At the bottom of the stairs, someone was waiting. A woman. She stood in the shadows, her dress old-fashioned, her skin pale as marble. Her hair fell in dark curls around her shoulders, and her lips moved as though whispering. But no sound reached him. Daniel gripped the banister, his heart racing. Who are you? The woman tilted her head, her eyes glinting with that same gray smoke. She raised a hand, beckoning him. Daniel shook his head. No. Stay away. But she didn't move closer. Instead, she turned and drifted silently down the corridor, her form half fading into the shadows as though the house itself swallowed her. Daniel stood frozen until she disappeared. When he finally found the courage to move, he didn't follow her. He went back upstairs, straight to his room. He slammed the door shut and locked it, though he doubted a lock would stop whatever lived here. The mirror greeted him as always, cracked and waiting. The sheet he had draped over it was gone again, though he didn't remember removing it. His reflection stared back at him with a tired, broken face, and then, faintly, the reflection blinked half a second too late. Daniel sank onto the bed, burying his face in his hands. His mind swirled with fragments. The whispers, the cellar door, the book, the portrait of his mother. None of it made sense. None of it could make sense. Unless his family was tied to this place in ways she never told him. The journal. He needed answers. He dug through his duffel and pulled out his own worn notebook. He flipped to an empty page and began writing furiously, his pen scratching across the paper. The house is alive. It knows me. My mother knew it, too. She was part of this. Richard isn't telling me everything. The whispers, the mirror, the cellar, they're connected. I have to know what's inside. I have to know what she did. The words spilled faster than his thoughts. He couldn't stop his hand. It felt almost as though the pen moved on its own, dragging letters he didn't recognize onto the page symbols. Circles, sharp lines, the same designs carved into the mirror's frame. When he dropped the pen, gasping, he realized the paper was filled with them. Dozens, hundreds. His handwriting, but not his will. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the lamp. The cracked mirror pulsed faintly with gray light, and in the reflection, standing behind him, was his mother. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His mother's reflection stood in the cracked glass, her figure pale and faintly translucent, as though painted in smoke. She looked younger than he remembered, her features soft, her eyes glowing faintly with that unnatural gray light. Mom, the word slipped from his lips. Before he could stop it, His voice cracked, trembling. The figure in the mirror tilted her head, her lips curving into a small, sorrowful smile. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying through the room as though the glass itself breathed the words. "You should not have come back, Daniel." Daniel staggered back, shaking his head. "What is this? You're gone. You're dead." The reflection blinked slowly, her expression full of grief. "I tried to keep you away. I thought if I left, if I severed the ties, the house would sleep. But blood calls to blood. It always does." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. "What do you mean? What's in this house? What's in the cellar?" The reflection darkened, her smile fading. For a moment, her form flickered, her features shifting into something hollow, skeletal, before snapping back to her familiar face. "The cellar is a prison," she whispered. "Our family built it to contain what we could not destroy. For generations, the Carters guarded it, watched it, fed it. When the house demanded, we are its bloodline, Daniel. Its wardens and its sacrifices." Daniel's stomach turned cold. Sacrifices. Her eyes glowed brighter, twin embers of gray fire. "I tried to end it. I thought if I opened the door, if I faced what was inside, I could finish it. But it consumed me. It marked me. Now it marks you." The mirror vibrated violently, cracks splitting deeper across its surface. Daniel stumbled toward the bed, clutching the frame to keep himself steady. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't real. You're not her. You're just the house, playing tricks." Her voice sharpened, desperate. "Listen to me, Daniel Lee. Richard will not tell you the truth. He will protect the house before he protects you. Do not trust him. And do not." Her voice cut out. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack. Daniel shielded his face as shards rained across the floor. When he lowered his arms, the frame was empty, jagged glass clinging to its edges like broken teeth. His mother's reflection was gone, but her words remained etched into his mind. "Richard will not tell you the truth." Daniel dropped to his knees, staring at the shards scattered across the floorboards. His reflection stared back at him from a dozen fractured angles, each version of himself slightly wrong, smiling when he wasn't. Blinking too slowly, their mouths whispering words he couldn't hear. A sudden knock rattled the door. Daniel Rited's voice. "Come. Controlled. Too controlled. Are you all right?" I heard something break. Daniel scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving. He glanced once more at the shattered mirror, then at the door. His mother's warning echoed in his head. "Do not trust him." Daniel hesitated at the door, his pulse hammering in his ears. Richard's voice was steady, calm, almost too calm. "I'm fine," Daniel said, forcing his tone to sound casual. "Just dropped something." The silence on the other side stretched too long. Finally, Richard replied, "Be careful. This house is fragile." Daniel swallowed hard. Right? The footsteps faded as Richard walked away. Daniel stayed still, staring at the door, until the silence returned. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He turned back to the mirror. Shards littered the floor like frozen raindrops. He crouched, careful not to cut himself, and picked one up. The surface shimmered faintly, the gray smoke pulsing inside the glass as though it were alive. He dropped it immediately, his skin prickling. It marked me. Now it marks you. His mother's words looped through his mind. He couldn't ignore them. Richard had answers he had too. By afternoon, Daniel found his uncle in the study, a dim chamber lined with shelves of old ledgers and faded maps. Richard sat at the desk, writing in a thick, leather-bound book, his pen scratching steadily. Daniel stood in the doorway. "We need to talk." Richard didn't look up. About the house, the cellar, our family. The pen stilled. Richard lifted his head slowly, his gray eyes sharp as blades. "I told you already. There are things you do not need to concern yourself with." Daniel stepped inside, fists clenched. "That's not enough." I saw her, Mom, in the mirror. For the first time, Richard's expression cracked. A flicker of something shock fear crossed his face before vanishing. "Impossible." "She spoke to me," Daniel pressed. "She told me not to trust you. She said you're hiding the truth." Richard stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. His voice dropped low. "Dangerous. Mirrors lie. Daniel, they show you what you want, or what you fear. That was not your mother, but she knew things." Daniel shot back. "She knew about the cellar? About the bloodline?" She said, "We're not just its guardians, we're its sacrifices." "What does that mean?" Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, Daniel thought he might strike him. Instead, his uncle walked to the window, staring out at the fog-choked yard. "Our family has carried this burden for centuries," Richard said quietly. "The house was built to contain what must never be free. That is the truth. Everything else is noise." Daniel shook his head. "You're lying. You're still hiding something." Richard turned, his gaze heavy, his voice cold. "You think you want the truth, but you don't. The truth is worse than the whisper, worse than the things you've seen in the glass." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "The truth will break you, as it broke your mother." Daniel's chest tightened. "So it was her. She opened the door, didn't she?" Richard's silence was answer enough. The air between them thickened, heavy with secrets unspoken. Richard finally moved toward the desk again, his hand gripping the edge like iron. "Stay away from the cellar, Daniel. For your sake and for hers." His voice trembled slightly on the last word. "Hers." Daniel felt his resolve hardened. Richard would never tell him everything. If he wanted answers, he would have to find them himself. And that meant going where no one wanted him to go. That night, The house felt different. The whispers didn't come in scattered fragments the way they had before. They came together layered, rhythmic, like a chant echoing through unseen corridors. The sound seeped through the walls, the floors, the very air. Daniel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every nerve on edge. Then came the knock. Not at his door, at He knew it instantly. The sound reverberated through the entire house, a dull, heavy thud that rattled his bones. Once, twice, 3 times. His breath quickened. Richard's warning replayed in his head. "Stay away from the cellar," his mother's voice followed. "They will not stop until the door is opened." The chant grew louder. The words were foreign, twisted, yet Daniel felt them burrow under his skin, vibrating in his chest like a second heartbeat. Against his will, he rose from bed, his legs carrying him toward the door. The hall stretched endlessly, lit by a sickly glow from sconces that flickered without flame. Shadows writhed along the walls, shapes that didn't match his own movements. The chanting pulled him forward, down the staircase, across the main hall. He reached the cellar door. The iron bands glistened with condensation, as though the wood itself was sweating. The air around it was colder, thicker. His breath fogged before him. His hand lifted, trembling, toward the handle. "Daniel!" He froze. The voice was behind him, his mother's again, urgent, desperate. "Do not touch it." "Not yet." Daniel spun, but the hall was empty. Only shadows. Only silence. Then, from the other side of the cellar door, another voice answered, deep, guttural, layered with too many tones to be human. "Open! Blood of Carter." The handle shook violently, rattling in its socket. The iron bands groaned as if straining to hold back something that pushed from the other side. Daniel stumbled backward, his chest heaving. The chanting roared now, filling every inch of the house, until it felt as though the walls themselves would collapse. He covered his ears, but it did nothing. The voices were inside him, pulling at the marrow of his bones. Then, all at once, silence. The door stilled. The air lightened. The house fell quiet. Daniel collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. His body trembled, his skin clammy with sweat. From upstairs came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Richard's voice called down, calm and steady, as if nothing had happened. "Daniel, come away from there." Daniel looked at the cellar door one last time. The iron bands still quivered faintly, as though something within was laughing. He turned and fled up the stairs, his uncle's gaze waiting for him at the top stern, knowing, and filled with a fear he no longer bothered to hide. The next morning, Daniel woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, his heart racing. but there was no fire. The room was hazy, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning wood. He coughed, stumbling to the door, but when he opened it, the hall was clear. Sunlight spilled faintly through the tall windows, painting dust motes in the air. No smoke, no flames. The house was playing with him again. Downstairs, he found Richard already at the dining table, sipping tea as though nothing in the world was wrong. Daniel froze in the doorway, studying him. The man looked unchanged, stern, composed, his every movement deliberate. But now, after what Daniel had seen and heard, every gesture seemed like a performance. "You were near the cellar last night." Richard didn't look up from his tea. His tone was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. Daniel's pulse quickened. "I heard something. Voices." Richard set the cup down. The porcelain clinked softly. "And did you listen?" Daniel hesitated. "I didn't open the door." "If that's what you mean." Richard finally raised his eyes. The gray in them seemed sharper today, like steel under sunlight. "Good. That is the only thing keeping this house from devouring you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You keep telling me not to open it, but you won't tell me what's inside. You say you're protecting me, but you're really protecting it." A shadow flickered across Richard's face. He stood slowly, his chair scraping back. "You think you know more than you do. That is dangerous. Knowledge is a curse in this house. It was for your mother. It will be for you." "My mother tried to stop it," Daniel shot back. "She opened the door, didn't she? And whatever's down there took her. Why didn't you tell me?" Richard's lips thinned. For a long moment, he said nothing, then, softly, "Because I hoped it would not claim you too." The words struck Daniel like a blow. There it was, confirmation, at last. His mother had been part of this, Richard knew, and he had kept it buried under silence and half-truths. Daniel stepped closer, anger rising in his chest. "If you really cared, you would help me end this, not just hide it, not just guard it. End it." Richard's expression hardened. "You cannot end it. You can only survive it." The silence between them was thick, broken only by the faint groan of the house settling. Daniel turned away, fists clenched, his thoughts racing. He couldn't rely on Richard. If he wanted answers, if he wanted freedom, he would have to find them himself. That night, the voices returned. They no longer whispered. They sang. A low, guttural hymn reverberated through the walls, shaking the very foundation. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his body frozen by the sound. The words were unintelligible, but the intent was clear. The house was calling to him, summoning him. The pull toward the cellar was unbearable. He tried to resist, gripping the bed frame, digging his nails into the wood, but every fiber of his being screamed to obey. Sweat dripped down his temples, his muscles trembling with the effort to stay still. Finally, he broke. He stumbled from the room, down the hall, down the staircase. His body moved like a puppet on strings, dragged forward by invisible hands. The chanting grew louder with each step, until it drowned out his own heartbeat. The cellar door waited, looming at the end of the corridor. Its iron bands pulsed faintly with gray light, the wood groaning as though alive. "Daniel." The voice slithered through the air, layered with tones both human and monstrous. "Blood of Carter. Key of flesh. Open!" His hand lifted to the handle. His skin burned where it touched the iron. And then, "Daniel." Richard's shout thundered through the hall. He ran toward him, his face twisted with fear unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. He grabbed Daniel's arm, yanking him back from the door. For the first time, Richard wasn't composed, wasn't calm. He was terrified. "You don't understand," he hissed. "If you open it now, there's no going back." Daniel wrenched his arm free, his voice shaking with fury. "Then tell me what's inside. Tell me the truth, before I find out myself." Richard stared at him, jaw clenched, eyes burning. The house trembled around them, the chanting rising, demanding. "Finally," Richard whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "It is the first Carter, the one who made the pact." Daniel froze, his uncle's words sinking into him like ice. "The first Carter?" he repeated. Richard's face was grim, his voice low, as if speaking too loudly would wake something just beyond the cellar door. "Elias Carter, the man who built this house, the one who cursed our bloodline. He was not a victim of this place. Daniel, he was its architect." Daniel's chest tightened. The portrait in the library, the book with his name. Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, Elias was a scholar, an alchemist. Some said even a sorcerer. When he came to Hollow Creek, he found something buried beneath the earth, something ancient. He thought he could control it, bind it, use it." The iron door behind them groaned, as if agreeing. "He built the cellar not as a prison, but as a pet," Richard continued, his hands clenched into fists. "Our family was tied to it from that moment on." Elias offered blood, his own and his descendants, in exchange for power and longevity. The house itself became the vessel of that bargain. Daniel's stomach twisted. "So, we're the payment." "Yes." Richard's eyes were dark with guilt. "Every generation, it calls to us, whispers, tempts. Some resist, some open the door. Your mother tried to break it, but the house is stronger than any one of us, stronger even than Elias in the end. He became what he tried to control. His spirit is bound within, and it will not stop until the pact is fed again." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "You mean he's still alive after all this time?" Richard's voice was a rasp. "Alive is not the right word. He endures. He waits. And he hungers." The cellar door rattled violently, as though something inside pounded with furious fists. Dust rained from the ceiling. The chanting swelled, pressing against their skulls until Daniel thought his head would split. Richard grabbed his arm. "You must understand now why you cannot open it. The house is bound to us. Yes, but as long as the door stays closed, the world is safe. Once opened, there will be no containing him again. Daniel's mind reeled. The reflection of his mother, the whispers, the book, the portraiture of it pointed to the same truth. And yet something inside him resisted. If that's true, Daniel said, his voice trembling with defiance, then guarding him isn't enough. Someone has to end this for good. Richard's face hardened, his fear shifting into anger. You don't know what you're saying. End it. Elias bound his soul with our blood. To unmake him would be to unmake us. You, me, every Carter still living. Do you want that? Daniel stared at the cellar, at the trembling iron bands, at the faint glow bleeding through the cracks. His heart pounded with terror and something else resolved. If that's the price, he whispered, maybe it's worth paying. The house roared. The chandeliers above them swung violently, glass shattering to the floor. The portraits along the walls rattled in their frames, their painted eyes glowing with gray fire. The cellar door pulsed like a heartbeat, each thud shaking the foundation of the house. Richard seized Daniel by the shoulders, his voice nearly lost in the cacophony. You don't understand. If you try to fight him, you will lose. You'll become what your mother became, another soul for the house to consume. Daniel's breath came fast, his body trembling under his uncle's grip. But deep inside, something had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't just afraid. He was angry, and anger was stronger than fear. The air inside the hall grew suffocating, thick with dust and the metallic temps of blood. The house groaned like a living beast, its walls trembling, its windows rattling in their frames. Daniel tore himself from Richard's grip. His uncle's nails left faint crescents in his shoulders, but he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the cellar door, on the faint gray light seeping from its cracks. Do you hear it? Daniel shouted over the roar. It's calling me. It wants me. Richard's face twisted with desperation. That's how it begins. It feeds on your defiance, your pride. That is how Elias bound himself. It made him believe he was strong enough to resist. Don't make the same mistake. Daniel's voice was raw, trembling with both fear and fury. If all we do is guard it, it will never end. Someone has to try. You think you're chosen. Richard spat, his composure cracking. You're not a savior. Daniel, you're a vessel. That's all you've ever been to this house. The words cut deep, but they only fueled Daniel's resolve. Then maybe I'll turn the vessel against it. He pushed past Richard, stepping toward the cellar. The chanting rose in triumph, the voices twisting into a single, thunderous call. Open, open, open. The iron bands glowed, the wood pulsed like flesh, bulging as though something inside pressed outward. The air grew colder, sharper, burning his lungs with every breath. Daniel, stop! Richard's voice broke with panic. For the first time, Daniel saw real fear in his uncle's eyes, not just for the house, but for him. But Daniel's hand was already on the handle. The iron scorched his palm, searing into his skin, but he held tight. His reflection flashed across the polished metal, only it wasn't his face. It was his mother's, her eyes glowing with gray fire, her lips mouthing silent words he couldn't hear. He tightened his grip, tears burning his eyes. "If you're still in there, if you can hear me, I'll finish what you started." The handle twisted beneath his hand, almost willingly. The iron bands screamed, snapping one by one. The chanting swelled into a fever pitch, rattling the foundations of the house. Richard lunged forward, grabbing his arm, his voice a desperate plea. "If you open that door, you condemn us all." Daniel turned, meeting his uncle's terrified gaze. "Maybe it's the only way to free us." With a final wrench, the last band snapped. The door shuddered, groaned, and began to open. A blast of icy wind surged out, carrying with it a chorus of screams, hundreds of voices, thousands, all wailing in agony and triumph. The hall was consumed in darkness, the chandeliers shattering, the portraits burning with gray fire, and from the abyss beyond the door, something stirred. Two eyes opened in the black, vast and endless, burning with the light of every Carter's soul that had ever been lost. "Welcome, blood of mine," the voice thundered, shaking the world itself. "At last, you returned to me." Daniel's knees buckled, the weight of it crushing him, but still, through the terror, through the storm of voices and shadows, he forced himself to stand. This was it, the moment he had been pulled toward since the day he arrived, and there was no turning back. The cellar door yawned wide, spilling a storm of shadows into the hall. The air reeked of ash and decay, burning Daniel's throat as he struggled to breathe. His Uncle Richard staggered back, shielding his eyes, but Daniel stood firm, his hand still seared to the handle, as if the house itself refused to let him go. From the darkness, the voice rose, again ancient, thunderous, carrying the weight of centuries. "Blood of Carter, vessel of my flesh, you belong to me." The shadows surged forward, wrapping around Daniel's legs, his chest, his arms, cold as ice and strong as iron. They pulled, dragging him toward the abyss. He cried out, fighting against them, but every movement was swallowed by the tide. Richard lunged, grabbing his nephew's arm. "Don't let it take you." His voice cracked with desperation. "Fight it, Daniel." Daniel's body trembled under the pressure, his vision blurred, his ears filled with screams, voices of the dead, of every Carter before him. He saw flashes. Elias at the altar, binding himself to the entity with blood. Generations kneeling before the cellar, sacrificing themselves to keep the pact alive. His mother, weeping as she opened the door, her soul torn away. And then her voice, clear, strong, cutting through the chaos. "End it, Daniel. End it." his mother's reflection flickered in the shadows, her hand outstretched, not pulling him in, but urging him to resist. Daniel's rage ignited. "You've fed on us long enough." He shouted into the abyss, "I won't be your prisoner. I won't be your blood." The shadows tightened, crushing him, but he pressed forward. His free hand fumbled in his pocket, closing around the shard of mirror he had taken earlier, still faintly glowing with that strange gray light. He raised it high. The entity roared, the house shaking violently, as though the world itself resisted. With a cry, Daniel plunged the shard into the threshold of the cellar door. The effect was immediate. Light exploded outward, searing and blinding, filling every crack of the house. The walls screamed as if alive, the portraits shrieking in unison, their painted faces burning away. The chanting shattered into chaos, voices dissolving into nothingness. The shadows recoiled, writhing in agony, pulling back into the abyss. The eyes in the darkness flickered, dimmed, then shattered into fragments of gray fire. The door slammed shut with a thunderous crack, the iron bands sealing themselves once more, this time glowing not with hunger, but with finality. Daniel collapsed to the floor, gasping, the shard slipping from his hand and shattering to dust. When the silence came, it was different. Not heavy, not waiting. For the first time since he arrived, the house was truly still. Richard knelt beside him, his face pale, his eyes wide with something between awe and terror. "What? What have you done?" Daniel forced himself upright, his body aching, his palms scarred where the iron had burned him. He met his uncle's gaze, his voice hoarse but steady. "I ended it." Richard shook his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "Or you've only begun something worse." But Daniel didn't answer. He rose to his feet, staring at the sealed cellar door one last time. The silence held. No whispers, no chanting, only quiet. He turned and walked away. Behind him, the house stood still in the morning light, its shadows finally silent. For now. Thank you for listening to Mystery Nights. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more long-form horror and mystery tales uploaded every week. The shadows may have fallen silent for now, but remember, in the Carter house, the whispers never truly end. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.